G'day. This is my fifth video in my series about creating a network probe on an Esp32 microcontroller. In this video, I want to put together a basic minimum viable product MVP version of the Angular client. And it's not going to be pretty, but it should allow me to manage the netProbe remotely and make sure all the basics are working. Now, this is not an Angular tutorial, so I'll skip most of the coding other than showing the main components and the general plumbing of the client. I'll also show anything that was new to me. I did run into a problem with getting the HTTP posts to work, so I'll show you how I updated MicroDot to get all that working. And the next video, number 6, that should be the last, and I'll look to clean up the client, add more styling, put everything together, add error catching, and put it in a nice box on the Esp32 board. And then we'll have a look at how the whole thing's working. So I'm going to make a new Angular project in my projects directory and call it netProbeUI. So this time I'm going to use routing. I think I'm not using the tab metaphor, so I think I need routing. I'll just use CSS. I'm probably not doing much styling anyway. So I've opened that project I just made in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to bring up a terminal, and then I'm going to use the ng add Angular material to add a material UI support. Okay, I'm just going to go with the default indigo pink. Go with the default for that. Allow animations. I'm going to bring in Angular Google Charts for my charting. So I'm going to use a npm install. And look at my package JSON. So it's showing it's in there. And now let's go into my app module, see if I can import things I need. So HTTP client module and the Google Charts module are the two I'm using. So those are in. Let's just do a quick ng-serve to make sure everything is working so far. And that's encouraging. I'll just do Control CI, have a look at the console. That looks okay. So it all looked good. I'm going to put this project into GitHub. Well, I can do that. Let's go over to there. So it's initial. I'll put it in a public repository. All looks good, and let me check up on GitHub. Looks like everything's there. So the first page I'm going to try and do is the
basically a home page, which will be like a view of all the hosts in a table with their ping, bing, and HTTP times shown in cells. A place where you can press a button to edit that host information, to change what you want to do with the host. A button to go to the charts for that particular host, and a delete button where you can delete the host. It'll take you to the host maintenance page where you can delete that host, and also a button down here where you can add another host to the list of hosts that get tested. I'm thinking this whole thing will probably be my home page, and then I'll probably have a component that represents each line in this table, and then within that I'll probably have a component for the actual display of the whatever value was last seen for the various tests in that. And all that information is going to come off this host status request, which you kind of see here. So it brings back details about the host and the last results for the last tests done for that host. So that's going to fill in this table at this level where I can do one request of this. It's going to bring down an array of hosts that's then going to fill in this table.
So I'll just go through the highlights of the Angular project. Again, this is an Angular tutorial, but I'll show you the main components that I put together. And at the moment I've just got this running as kind of a minimally viable product, so no prettying up of the HTML or anything like that, and still got some work to do to catch errors and things like that, but it gives an idea of how things are put together. So the first page I have is this home page, and this is what it looks like when it comes up. So I can refresh it, and you see down here it's basically has a table, one line per host that's been tested, and the 3 tests that are in place for that host. If one of these tests aren't active, then it's just a blank in the square. And the other thing it shows you is if the last one of these tests failed, so this last being on my host New Zealand failed, so it shows a red background, but it still shows the last value it received on the last successful test on here. So kind of just a nice summary screen of seeing all the hosts. And it also has the links on it, so if you click on one of these links, it takes you to the update page for Lupincorp. This takes you to delete that host from our tests, and this is how you add a new host, so we'll have a look at that in a sec. But let's look at the code that made that up. So this is the home page, so just looking at the HTML for that page. Here we see it's really just put together as a table, and then has an ng4 for each row in that table, where it shows the 3 cells for ping, bing, and the web test, and then it's using this value cell component to show the little cell, because I didn't want to redo the highlighting and all that logic every time for every cell. So that's value cell component is defined down in the shared area, so it's just got a little bit of HTML with some classes and things that get set depending on whether the success flag has been set and what the value is and things like that, and number of fixed decimal points that you want to show. So those are all parameters that go in as inputs to this component, and just makes all the cells look the same, because it's basically the same value cell component used in all of them. The other thing to be aware of is the app module. Sorry, not the app module, the app routing module here. This is where the routes get set up. So I've set up all the routes that I'm using, but the one we just saw was the home component. So basically when you go just to the top level of the website, then the home component is going to be shown. So this is how it gets routed there. And then the other 2 components is a history component, so for showing you charts, and the host component for showing you ability to update the host information, delete the host information, add a new host and things. So those are all the routes needed for that. And the last thing I'll just show you to do with the home page is under services. So there's a host service I set up here. Again, just follows a typical sort of Angular function for a service. So uses the HTTP client to call the web service down on the netProbe Esp32. Uses environment to find out what the address, basically the address of that netProbe is, so you can set that up and point it at different netProbes. And I think that's about it. And then the actual request to get host status. So this is how the home page gets its data, and it's just doing a call out to HTTP environment netProbe host status, and we saw that web service defined before, and returns an observable on host status, which then gets processed in the home page to display that table. And let's just go back one more time, have a look at the page here. Let's bring up the debugging option and look at what's happening on the network, and I'll just do a refresh so you can basically see what happens. And you can see here's the host status call, and we can have a look at the response that comes back. So that's just what we saw from the web service call. So this is what gets pulled in and displays all this stuff up here. Now from the home page, you can go into the history where you see charts for all these different tests and hosts, and again that link is set up in the value cell just to make it always work the same. So let's have a look at what's happening. Let's just have a look at garden home ping times, because they're quite variable. And this is kind of the result you see. I'm using Google Charts here to show what the actual round trip response time was seen to my garden home host out there. At the moment it's just showing 2 days worth of values. I can look at 2 hours worth of values, 8 hours of values. I put little dots on here because if one of these fails, the pings probably won't fail, but like the bings periodically fail. So you can see where a missed test occurred. So those are all not summarized values. Once you get past about 12 hours, so if I look at 14 hours, we start seeing averages by hour, so things smooth out a bit. And this shows the various percentiles, so the 10th percentile, the 50th percentile, and the 90th percentile. So you know, in this case, 90% of the results for that hour was below 451 milliseconds. 50% of them were below 293 milliseconds. So I find percentiles is a better way of looking at response times than means, because usually the data is sort of skewed towards the higher round trip values that occur once in a while, but it really skews the values up here. And the other ones is once you get past about 2 days, say for 7 days values, it averages over the 7 days. I haven't got 7 days worth of data there, but you can see again it's even smooths out more because we're looking at a day's worth of values being changed into percentiles. So let's look at the code for that. So like I said, in the routing, history is called by a history/id/type. So host ID would be say 2, and the type might be ping in this case, which means go over the history component. In the history component, like I said, it's using the Google Charts to display it, and then some radio buttons, and I'm using material radio buttons here. Again, all this is sort of minimum viable product, so I haven't done the prettying up of the pages yet, so I'll probably show that towards the end of this video or in the next video, which should be the final video. And then for the code for this, maybe the most important bit is on init, pulls the values from the router. So the router comes in with the ID and the type, so I pull those values, put them into this type and this ID, and then when someone clicks on one of those radio buttons to change the number of of days. It gets the value and then calls the do charting with the number of hours that should be charted, and then this do charting sets up the actual values that are displayed on the chart. So the y-axis in this case then gets history out of the logger service. So let's get history out of the logger service, and then subscribes to the observable, and then in this case goes through. First thing it does is checks to see whether summarized data is coming back or not. So it just looks at the first entry that came back of history, and if it has a P50 value, it means that it's coming back as summarized data, which is a different format from the unsummarized data, and then displays the chart one way or the other depending on whether it's showing a summarized or not unsummarized chart. And then just get some host information as well. So it's calling get host to get the information about what the host address is, so it can display it in the title. So that's the charting or history part of the Angular app. Okay, last component to look at is the host component, and that's where I do all the maintenance on this list of hosts. So I can, from this home page, I can click the X next to the host to delete that host. It'll take me to the host and allow me to delete it. I can click on the host to update it, or I can add a new host. So let's have a look at what that looks like. So this is the host page, and again, no pretty formatting yet, so it looks pretty horrible, but I'll clean that up in a sec. But here it goes in and shows you the address, the description, whether ping's active, and the ping interval, ping update interval, same for Bing and web, and also takes HTTPS flag, and the web URL and any string to match. And you can see this is set up for delete because I went into it with a delete. So you actually have to do 2 clicks to delete something, which makes things a bit safer. If I want to update a host, I just click on that, and again it shows the same thing, but it's a update operation that time. If I want to add a new one, it shows me an empty host page to fill in and then do an add. Now, one thing I ran into was to do these operations, like doing an add or an update, and we can have a look at the service here for host. If I want to do something like add a host, then I want to send a post command. So I use the HTTP client and the post option. In this case with host/add, which ties into my netProbe MicroDot service, and then I'm sending in the actual body of the post the host class, which is all the information that needs to be added to create a host. So let's look at one problem I ran into with doing hosts to do with the core security. So for doing an add of a new host or a update of a new host, I wanted to send JSON with the host object up to the MicroDot server. So this is what I set up. So down in the Angular application, in the services and the host services, I added this add host service, which takes a host object, goes through here and does a HTTP post with host add as the URL, and then the actual body of the request is going to be the host. I'm calling that from down here in the host screen. We'll see that in the browser in a sec, but where we do an update, it calls the update function, and it's basically doing a call to the host service and the function I just showed you, add host, with the host information. And the other thing I did was down in the MicroPython program that's running MicroDot, I set up a new route that responds to post requests, looking for the pattern of host add, and at the moment I just print what's in the ever's in the body. Let's run that, get that running on the so that's running on address .46, and let's go over to so this is my interface here, and I've got things like the whatever the console's printing out, and I'm also doing a network trace at the same time. So let's go into my host, just an example of a host. Again, I'll clear out the network, clear out the console, and let's do an update, which should do a post of the host information. And this is where I'm running difficulty. So I'm seeing an error come back from .46 saying I've been blocked by a cause policy. I don't allow cross-origin posts. So I got out my Wireshark to see what was happening. Let me just clear that, start another one and do this again. And we'll just go into this, send another update, does the same thing. We'll stop Wireshark. And what we see here is instead of seeing a post go up to the netProbe MicroDot server, I'm seeing this, it's doing an options request. And this seems to be part of cause. So I need to be able to respond to an options request and be able to send back information that it does allow posts across origin. So let's have a look at how we're going to do this. Okay, so it looks like the HTTP client for Angular always does a cause request before it does a post. To check whether it can actually send the request, and that's the error I'm getting. So what I've done is, if we have a look under GitHub for the MicroDot, we see there's a couple of let's go back up one. Under source, there's a library for cause that supports cause, and if we look for examples, and we see there's an example for how to use that library. So it's as simple as importing the MicroDot cause, setting up the cause headers that will be returned, and just pop that into your code. So let's see what I did here. So I did the same thing here. I did an import of cause, just that one library, and then after the MicroDot app instance is created, I called the cause for app and included allow origins any, so allow any client to call the post, and allow credentials equals true. So that's the only change I made to the code there. So let's start running that again. And if I go back to my page here, and we'll clear everything out. So this is ready to do another post, and I'll just reset Wireshark as well and get a new trace as well. So we should be ready to go. Let's do a update. So that's encouraging. It sent the request this time, the post, and got a response. Let's look in the network. Okay, so it looks like everything went through there. And if I look down in my print statement from my MicroPython code. So I've got this route set up here for app post. If it sees host add, then it prints out add host and the contents of the body, and that's what we're seeing here, add host, and there we see the JSON that I was sending down to the MicroDot server. So that's good. I can do something with that, send that on to the add host code. And let's just have a final look over here at the what happened in the on the network. So we did the options host add as before, but this time when we got the response here, we see it sent back access control allow origin, and it allows the origin of the host that made the request, because I said allow any origin, and that processed the post, and you can see the class going back, and that got a response as well. So that's good. So got past the cause part of this. Again, I'm not too worried about security for this netProbe, because it's just going to be running inside my home firewall. It's not something that goes out on the internet or anything. If I was worried about that, then I'd change some of the parameters around cause so that I can cut down what can actually make requests to the MicroDot web server. So that's most of the heavy lifting for the Angular client. Like I said, next video, look to pretty things up, make the client look a little nicer, and put all the pieces together in a box, and make sure it's all working, and see if we've got any ideas on anything else we need to do with it.